Welcome to Loving Life Conversation Series Live, People Who Change the World. Today, we're so honored to have Ashmeet Sidana, who's the founder and chief engineer of Engineering Capital. Welcome, Ashmeet.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So before I officially introduce Ashmeet, I want to say a few words about the structure of today's conversation. So it'll be a three-part conversation. The first part will be Ashmeet sharing with us his life story. Really, what are the life events, key milestones to get him where he is as an investor, entrepreneur, and also as really one of the co-founding investor for many of the software company that he leads in Seed. And then second part will be a fireside chat between Ashmeet and myself. And thank you for all of you who provided questions in advance. I'll make sure to ask the biggest trends for the question. And then finally, we'll have Q&A for the audience. And now I would like to really give an official introduction and warm welcome to Ashmeet. He founded and is currently the chief engineer of Engineering Capital, which specializes in leading seed rounds for software companies. And many of his investments have either gone through IPO or have successful acquisition. And most importantly, when I met Ashmeet in person at Stanford, he is someone who has real wisdom into life, into work. So we're so honored to have Ashmeet with us today. With that, Ashmeet, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Faye. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't consider myself an expert on philosophy or life. I think of myself as an engineer and a venture capitalist, but I'm certainly happy to share any lessons that I have had in my journey. Would you like me to start with that? I think that's what you had mentioned.
Yes, whatever you feel like doing.
Well, my life has been one of tremendous change, luck, and then growth. And so I grew up in India. My father was a farmer. We lived in a mud house, no running water, no plumbing, no electricity, in a very rural part of India. For those of you who are familiar, India is a vast country with huge disparities in wealth. And it was very different from the way we think of our lives today. In some ways, I lived the way people lived thousands of years ago. In fact, one of the three great civilizations of the ancient world, the Egyptian civilization, the Chinese civilization on the Yangtze River, and then obviously the Indus Valley civilization, is actually only about 50 miles from where my father's village farm was. And the way we lived is like how people lived there. We plowed the field with camels. We cut wheat by hand. We threshed the wheat with wooden logs. My mother cooked on an open fire. And so it really was no different than how people lived 5,000 years ago when those ancient civilizations developed. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit. We had a radio, so we could get news from outside. Travel was very primitive. There were no roads. But there was a train that came once a week. So, we had some access to the outside world. And from there, thanks to some, great fortune, even though we were very poor, my parents were educated. And so they worked extremely hard, like good Asian parents, for our education, including making a very important decision, which was to choose English in our case. So my mother believed that English will help us tremendously, and she really wanted us to go to a school where we would start in English. And so in some sense, English became my first language, not quite, but since grade 1, I've been learning in English. And so that obviously helps tremendously if you want to come outside, if you want to come to America. So great fortune over there. Through the gift of education, which is one of the greatest gifts that parents can give their children, I ended up over here in Silicon Valley at Stanford in graduate school, studying computer science, which was my passion. So I love computer science. I am an engineer. And, this whole idea of what you can compute and what are the true limits of computation really became a passion for me. And so then I have lived and worked in Silicon Valley ever since. I started a company soon after graduating, So I went through the entrepreneurial journey. Obviously, that's an intense, effort. And I had a modest success. The company I started, SSI, we didn't go public, but I did sell it successfully. I did enjoy the fruits of that labor. And so then as a young man, single guy in Silicon Valley, I took some time off, right? I did all the crazy things that a 20-year-old does when he doesn't have to work again. I did a trip to Mount Everest. Did not go to the summit, but I did climb and, just experience that physical side after a very intense mental sort of, thoughtful experience. I was trying to sort of physically experience world. I learned how to ski. For someone who lived in the desert, it was amazing to go to the mountains and the snow. And I still love to ski. I still love to travel. I got married. I got my MBA. I did all kinds of things other than work for 3 years. And it was a period of tremendous growth for me as a person, both in terms of understanding who I was, understanding the world and what I wanted to do. And then eventually I became a venture capitalist. Today I run Engineering Capital, a firm that I started, which has a specialist practice. We really are different. There are many, many VCs in Silicon Valley, especially, and it's hard to distinguish yourself as a venture capitalist. And so what I decided to do is focus on the things that I truly love, which also happen to be a market need. You have to have both things to be true if you're going to build a successful firm. And in my case, what I love is computer science, and where I saw there was a need in the market is software companies which were taking technical risk. In other words, the risk was not whether if you built the product, the customers would buy the product. That's what most companies worry about, most VCs worry about. The risk was, will you be able to build the product? We know they want to buy it. We know there's a demand for it. We just don't know how to build it. And so there is a subset of companies where that is the dominant risk, and that's what I focus on. And as we evolve in the conversation, I'm happy to, describe more technically depending on what the audience is interested in. But that's been my journey. I now live here in Silicon Valley. I think of myself as an American. This is my home, and practice the craft of venture capital. It's a real pleasure to meet you. Like I said, I'm not a philosopher, but I'm certainly happy to share any of the experiences that I have had, having personally lived roughly 5,000 years of human progress in my short life.
Thank you, Ashmeet. What an intro. And then you talk about the things I had no idea before the last 10 minutes. I want to start with the question of passion. You mentioned that passion is computer science. How did you know it was your passion from the first place? And how do you know that it stays to be your passion throughout your career?
Yeah, that's a great question, because to find your passion is hard. And certainly where I was living, there was no computers or knowledge of computer science. I mean, I had no concept when I was a child. There is something called a computer. It's really important to understand that you can find your passion only if you're curious. You have to exercise your curiosity. I was always a very curious child. So for example, on our farm, my father would sometimes go to the city and he would buy recycled magazines, recycled newspapers, because we didn't have any delivery of, magazines and things, and it was very expensive to buy foreign magazines. But, you could buy the old ones. You could buy from the recycling shops. You could go and buy the ones that people had thrown away. And you could buy them. And my father would go and buy them and bring them back. And I would read them. And I would read them from cover to cover. I would read the advertisements. I would read the copyright notice in the front of the book. I would read, what was in the index. Why did it say that, it was printed in a certain place? I remember reading a book from my grandfather, which at one point my grandfather had worked on a project far away, and he was working with the British Army, and they had an American Jeep, and he had the owner's manual for a World War II Jeep, the maintenance and owner's manual. And I remember reading that from cover to cover and wondering about, Toledo, Ohio, like what is Toledo, Ohio? So I was always a very curious child. And for all of your listeners, who have not yet found your passion, my advice is indulge your curiosity. You don't know where it will lead you. In my case, my curiosity led me to visit one of my friends. By then, my parents had sent us to Delhi because there was no good education in the village. So we used to rent an apartment, and my mother used to live with us in Delhi. And I went to visit a friend of mine whose sister had gotten married, was throwing away her books. And I happened to visit my friend, and his older sister had gotten married. And in that pile of books she was throwing away was a book called Teach Yourself Programming. And I was like, hey, can I take this book? And she was like, yeah, I'm going to throw them away. She was moving out. She was cleaning her room, literally after what, people do after they get married and they're going to move away. And so I brought that book home, and I read this book called Teach Yourself Programming, and I fell in love with computers. It was just the idea. I had never seen a computer. I had no idea what it looks like. What is the physical presence of a computer? I had never touched a computer, but I could imagine what a computer is like. And I started writing programs just with a pencil and paper, just to indulge my curiosity. Like, what would it be like? And then, of course, eventually, when I had access to a computer, it was life-changing. The idea that you can imagine something in your mind and it can suddenly, be manifested in a program, and the machine will do what you tell it to do, is, of course, such a powerful concept that it changed the world. I mean, computers have obviously changed the world. Arguably one of the most important inventions in human civilization, no question about it. In my case, it was indulging my curiosity, and then luck, right? It's serendipity, it's luck. The second part I would say about finding your passion is something I learned from my father, who always said, the best fertilizer is the dirt on your shoes. And he meant that quite literally on a farm, meaning that you have to go out there and you have to get your shoes dirty if you're going to work. You have to work hard, okay? That's what you have to do on a farm. You cannot do farming by sitting in a room or reading a book or talking with someone about it. No, farming is done by getting your shoes dirty. But I think he also meant it metaphorically, where he meant that you have to go out and experience the world yourself. It's not enough to sit behind a screen or a computer and just imagine what's going on or talk to someone about it. You have to experience it yourself. So, for example, when I was running product management at VMware, for those of your listeners who are not familiar, VMware is a very large software company. It's about a $50 billion market cap software company here in Silicon Valley. And I was an early employee there. I was not the founder, but I was a very early employee. And I used to run, their main flagship product. And I was running product management there. And one of my rules was, for my product managers, was you have to spend 30% of your time with an actual customer. Meaning, I want you to go and spend the time physically with the customer on a telephone, by visiting them, etc. The truth is not in the building. The truth is you're not going to learn by sitting here. You're going to learn by going out. You're actually working when you go out, despite all the effort and inefficiency of travel and the wasted time. That's where you will learn. And so the best fertilizer is the dirt on your shoes. You have to go out, you have to experience it, and then come back. So that is how really learning happens.
Indulge your curiosity. The best fertilizer is the dirt on your shoes, and you have to experience yourself. So these are the 3 golden rules from Ashmeet, from the first part. And you mentioned earlier that it has to be marrying your passion, your love with a market. And a lot of friends I talk with who are in the audience today, either in consulting or in banking, and then they have a passion that they think they're passionate about it, but they don't know if it's going to make money, if it's going to sustain life. So that's my second question, which is, how did you marry your passion with a market? Of course, you mentioned luck. Is there something more to that? And how do you find the product market fit, both for your own life and as advice to young founders or to be founders?
Yeah, so the short version is you have to try through trial and error, through iteration. That's how you find it. But I want to step back and first say that, for the people who come from consulting and banking, they're probably good people, they work hard, but with all due respect, those are not good careers to train yourself for entrepreneurship, to really understand how to build and grow something. So, Steve Jobs has a wonderful way of saying it. Steve Jobs, obviously a great man and a great entrepreneur. He can say it in a more tough love way. I'll try to be a little bit more polite about it and just say that, please don't waste your life, spending time on those things. If you truly have a passion in terms of creating something, building something, learning something, that is not what you will get in those careers. Those careers are what I call support careers, service careers. You are helping someone else succeed. You're helping someone else win. And the analogy I like to make is most people know how to ride a bicycle. Most people learn how to ride a bicycle when they're a child, or at some point in their life they learn how to ride a bicycle. You cannot learn how to ride a bicycle by reading a book about it. You cannot learn how to ride a bicycle by watching a movie of somebody riding a bicycle. You cannot learn how to ride a bicycle by somebody telling you, oh, that's how you do it. You sit on it and you pedal and you ride a bicycle. No, that you cannot learn by ride a bicycle. The only way to learn a bicycle, to ride how to a bicycle, is to get on a bicycle and fall down. Nobody ever learned how to ride a bicycle without falling at least once. Okay. And so that's the difference between consulting or banking and actually building something or doing something. So entrepreneurship, market opportunity, finding product market fit is like riding a bicycle. You have to experience it yourself. You have to do it yourself. Doing consulting is like watching a movie or reading a book about something. There's value in that. You can create value. I'm not saying that, you can make money, you can help someone, you can create value, you can do all of those things. But it is not a path to finding product market fit. Product market fit is found by building those, by making the mistakes that come from actually iterating on building something yourself. That is when you know in your gut that you've actually done something. I think one of the best examples of that is the launch of the iPhone. And for those of your viewers who have not seen the video, when the iPhone was launched by Steve Jobs, obviously a very important product, obviously had a huge impact, on our tech ecosystem in the last 10, 15 years. Arguably the single most important product in the tech industry, I would argue, is the smartphone or the iPhone. When Steve Jobs launched the iPhone, the CEO of Microsoft was Steve Ballmer. And most people don't realize that, but the #1 smartphone company in the world when the iPhone was launched was actually Microsoft. Most people don't realize. Most people think of Nokia. Most people think of, other Motorola, other manufacturers as being very large manufacturers at that time. Actually, the largest install base for smartphones was the Windows Phone by Microsoft. It was a very small install base. It was not a very successful product because, with all due respect, it wasn't a great product. It was basically Windows, shrunk down into a small form factor. And when the iPhone was launched, Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO of Microsoft, was told that Microsoft has launched this and, it's going to be a $500 product and it has these 3 main features. It plays music, you can make phone calls, and you can surf the internet. Remember, it plays music, you can make phone calls, and you can surf the internet. That's the famous launch of, the 3 features that Steve Jobs had picked to do it. And Steve Ballmer happened to be on stage and happened to be in a conference. And so he was being recorded. And so his reaction in live real time is recorded when he learned what is the iPhone. Go online, go on YouTube and search for Steve Ballmer iPhone launch. And you will see a video of a man who burst out laughing. And he had to stop himself from being rude by saying, it's never going to work. It's a crazy idea. That's what he's implying. He didn't use exactly those words, but he implied that. He said something to the effect of, let them try it. $500? He thought it was too expensive. He did not understand the power of what Steve Jobs had created and what he was doing. Because, with all due respect, Steve Ballmer was not a practitioner. He had never actually sat and rode the bicycle himself. He joined Microsoft when Bill Gates and Paul Allen had already built a very interesting company. He joined a company, and he was a very successful employee. He was a very, obviously he became, one of the largest owners of the company. He was very successful. He's a very rich man, etc. But the lesson is that he came in to head, at that time, the go-to-market or the sales function. And he was not a product person himself. Steve Jobs was a product person. He had made many mistakes. He launched the entire next line had failed for Steve Jobs. He learned a lot of very hard lessons. He had ridden the bicycle himself and he had fallen down, and he knew how to pick himself up and what are the features that will matter. And equally important, what are the features that will not matter? What to leave out of the iPhone and what to add in is as important. And so he was able to do that. Microsoft was not able to do that. Microsoft obviously lost the smartphone race and was not able to, even today has really no penetration there, has no product there which is successful, despite knowing that it is a large market, despite knowing that this is where the technology was headed, despite having infinite amount of capital, infinite amount of resources available to itself. Some people would argue a monopoly position in the company, etc. Despite having all of those assets, they lost to an upstart because they had not ridden the bicycle. The person who was making those decisions didn't have that gut instinct and that experience of how you find product market fit. Product market fit is the outcome of many iterations paired with good judgment, with good experience. You cannot do it without that experience. You've got to do both of them. So that's sort of the journey for a founder, a product person. And I can talk about it, from the lens of a Facebook or the lens of a Google. Most people forget Google's first product was not a search engine on the internet. Google's first product was an OEM license to Yahoo. They were selling, technology to Yahoo. So to make that pivot, to understand where you are going, you have to iterate, you have to make mistakes, and then you get better.
So it has to be someone who has ridden a bicycle themselves, failed many, many times, managed to get back up, and there's a slight chance they will learn to ride a bicycle and sail far.
And that's why there's always an element of luck. That is why there is always an element of luck. You can fall down from a bicycle and break a leg. That happens. 1 in a million people break a leg when they fall. Most people get a little bruise or a little scratch or something, but 1 in a million times you can break a leg. You can break your head. It doesn't happen very often, thankfully, but unfortunately it can happen. So, there's always a luck element in finding product market fit.
There's a luck element.
There's always a luck element. I was sitting on the phone at VMware talking to customers one day, and I was talking to a customer in North Carolina who worked for Bank of America. And this is very early in the history of VMware. And he said something, I won't bore the audience with the exact details. It was to do with server consolidation, which became a huge market for VMware. And I remember listening to him, and I remember the hair standing up on the back of my neck, because I could feel that this is the thing. This is the magic value that's going to really, really matter. So, you have to, but I called many customers and I talked to many of them, and most of them are just boring conversations, where you're just wasting time. But it's that 1 in 100 conversation that you really have to make, that really ends up mattering.
It's like finding treasure in a garbage can. And you found it.
That's a great analogy. It is finding treasure in a garbage. Yes, it is. You have to sift through a lot of, just a lot of crud to get to it. And that's why it's hard work. Most people don't realize how hard the hard work is. So, how hard a Mark Zuckerberg works, or a Steve Jobs works, or a Bill Gates works, or, any of these people, because they're constantly sifting. What you only see is the value part, the treasure part. You don't see the garbage part that they go through. That's what happens, right? So, so people think it's easier than it actually is, because they only focus on the positive outcomes, but there are many, many, many negative outcomes to result in that positive outcome.
So it really requires the entrepreneurs or the founders to have a big, tough heart in some way, because they have to face a lot of failure. I guess my question, many of the audience today are founders or to be founders and also emerging leaders in investing, especially in your field as a VC, you focus on the product, the technical risk, whether the product can even be built, which to me is even harder than the average job of VC. What do you look at in the founders when you make an investment? Is it their resilience? Is it their smartness? Is it their understanding the market? What do you look for in their teams?
Faye, you asked a very important question because there's a great debate in venture capital on, is it the market that creates the entrepreneur or is it the entrepreneur that creates the market? In other words, if you were to pick up Mark Zuckerberg and put him in a different market, would he still have been as special as he is? Or is it that, social networking happened because it was Mark Zuckerberg? Obviously, it's a little bit of both. The question is, which is more important? I happen to think it's the entrepreneur who is more important. Okay, there were great entrepreneurs, Rockefeller in the late 1800s. There were great entrepreneurs, Leland Stanford, in the very late 1800s, the early 1900s. There were great entrepreneurs. We can point to people in different eras of history, and we can find great entrepreneurs in any of those times. In the 1700s, it was the East India Company. You're of Chinese origin. I am of Indian origin. We suffered at the hands of the East India Company. Right? I mean, the opium wars in China were created by the East India Company. India became a colony and suffered for 200 years, went from being the second richest country in the world to being one of the poorest countries in the world because of, the East India Company. They were great entrepreneurs. They made a lot of money for, people sitting in London. But, your and my ancestors suffered at the hands of that. So entrepreneurs can exist in any market. And it can be a positive force or a negative force. And that's more of a philosophical or an ethical question. So because I come from that belief that entrepreneurs can succeed in any market, it's really about the inner characteristics of the entrepreneur, the innate characteristics of the entrepreneur. And you've referred to some of them already. So for example, resilience is very important. Hard work is very important. I think those are foundational characteristics that a person has to have. The entrepreneurial journey is very emotional, very difficult, high risk. And so resilience is critical. Like I said, you're going to fail many times. If the first time you fail, you get depressed and you give up working hard, it's just not going to happen, right? You're not going to succeed. The way I describe the ideal entrepreneur is that there is a foundation of core characteristics that all good entrepreneurs have. They're all intelligent. They're all hardworking. They all listen very well. They all are extremely determined. So like you said, resilient. And they tend to be educated in some way. Educated doesn't mean that they have a certificate from a famous university, but they've educated themselves in some way. They know something in a very special way where they have spent time. Sometimes it's a university. Sometimes they have a PhD in computer science and, they do something. And sometimes they have no education at all. They drop out of school like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, but they become an expert in something. They come to learn and understand something better than anyone else. So, in the case of Microsoft, their first product was a compiler for the Altair 8800. And if you see the source code of that very first product, which now happens to be open source. So it's actually in the Computer History Museum in Mountain View. You can go and visit it and you can actually see this. So you can see the actual source code that was written by Microsoft for this very first product. And on top of it, it says authors, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, mostly Bill Gates. Okay. So, he had become an expert on compilers, on writing a compiler for the Altair 8800, when most people didn't even know what a compiler is. Most people didn't even know that an Altair 8800 exists. Most people had no clue why the Altair 8800 was such an important thing for him to understand. He moved physically from Harvard to New Mexico because that's where Altair was. And he lived, most people don't know, Microsoft started in New Mexico. So Microsoft was incorporated and started as a company in New Mexico, and then eventually moved to Seattle or Redmond. And so those journeys are lost because he was a great entrepreneur. He had the determination and he had educated themselves. And so entrepreneurs have this foundation. On this foundation, they add a couple of contradictory characteristics. For example, great entrepreneurs are very determined. They're very persistent, but they are not obstinate. Persistence and obstinacy are the opposite of each other, but they look almost identical. It can be the exact same behavior. And sometimes you only know in hindsight that the person was being persistent and they finally made it, or they were just being obstinate and then they failed after year after year after year. You have to make that judgment call yourself as an entrepreneur. So they have both those abilities. They have the ability to be persistent and not be obstinate. In other words, be flexible and change their mind when it's important, when the market tells them that that's not the right market to be in, that you need to change. So they have those types of characteristics. And then in my particular case, they have to be very technical. You've got to have the domain knowledge. You've got to understand the market in a way and understand technology in a way that, you know, few people do. Because if you have an ordinary understanding, then you're not going to win. You have to have a special understanding. So the question I like to ask myself is, what do I know where I think I'm better than most other people? That's not an ego question. That's a question of testing yourself, of measuring yourself, of saying, you know, are there 100 other people in the world that know this better than me? Are there 1,000 other people? Are there 10,000 other people? Are there 1 billion other people who know it better than me? You know, for example, if you asked me about calculus, you know, I studied calculus in college. I mean, I'm an engineer and, you know, I got good grades and I did all of that. But then I never used calculus again after that because I went into computer science and I went into systems. And so that part of computer science doesn't use calculus. I bet there are millions and millions of people in the world who know calculus better than me. There has to be, okay? Maybe 1 billion people in the world. I mean, the whole world is 6-7 billion people. Maybe there's 1 billion people in the world who know calculus as well or better than me. So that's not an interesting place for me to compete, okay? I would not compete on the basis of calculus. But there are other things which I have spent a lot of time thinking about and, you know, worrying about, where there's a fewer number of people that you really understand well. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, the question I would ask yourself is, if there's 10 people or 100 people, yeah, you can win that game. You know, you can be 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100. It's very hard to be 1 out of 1 million or 1 out of 100 million. It's very hard to win that game. And so that's the game of entrepreneurship. You have to be 1 out of some set. And so you better pick something that you can win at. And at the same time, it better be big enough for you to result in a big outcome. There's a lot of PhDs who are number 1 in the world at something, but there's no market for it. It's a useless, you know, piece of, I mean, it's good research, but it's useless from a market perspective. And so they may be number 1 out of, you know, 7 billion people in the world, but it's not going to result in a company being created. So you have to find that balance. And that's why, you know, entrepreneurship is a package deal. To end my answer to your question, I will say an entrepreneur is a package who has all these attributes. But remember, you don't start with all these attributes when you start the company. You have to grow these attributes over time. So Mark Zuckerberg was not an expert in social networking when he started Facebook. You know, Steve Jobs was not an expert in even computers when he started Apple, or certainly not the iPhone or smartphones when he launched that product. They learned that along the way. You have to grow, you have to learn. You have to learn how to manage people, you have to be a leader, you have to learn finance, you have to learn accounting. Those are basic skills that all good entrepreneurs have. So they are a package of as much as you can when you start, and then you grow as fast as you can. The great entrepreneurs grow. They grow very, very fast.
There's so many things I love about your answer. I'll highlight three of them. One is you're always so precise in your thinking, and then you pick the right words. I remember at Stanford, you talk about venture capital is simple but not easy. And then you did the same thing with persistency and obstinacy. And number two, you talk about the function of whether a startup will become a unicorn or a decacorn is a function whether the founder or the founding teams are better than 1 of 10, 1 of 100 is how good they are in the field that they have picked. And then finally, you talk about growth, which is so encouraging because this is the spirit of entrepreneurship. You don't have to be good right now. You just have to have the characteristics to help you grow. Which leads to my next question. You talked very early on about the product, the technical risk is what you focus on. That's where you believe instead of competing on the basis of calculus, you can compete on the basis of finding technical insight. And there's another thing you mentioned in your answer, which is consulting service is helping other people succeed. One of the biggest debate in venture capital is whether VCs do anything to help or do they pick the winners. Where do you stand on that question? And I know I read how the founders talk about you. You're really a co-founding investor. So apparently to you, it's not just helping other people succeed, but in a big way, you are actually building the team with them.
Well, I'm very grateful and I'm very honored that there are people who think of me as a co-founding investor and who have given me some very nice quotes and have given some nice praise. But overall in the venture industry, I would say a good VC is one who doesn't create any damage, who's net zero. Okay, a good VC is someone who definitely, on average, is going to be a net zero in the company. There are a few great VCs who will occasionally help in a dramatic way, will be able to make a company a better company and will result in a better outcome. Yes, those VCs exist, but there are few, and that's just the sad nature of the venture industry. Now, that doesn't mean that us as VCs shouldn't strive to work hard to understand how to help our companies. We all need to do that. We all should be doing that. And if you're an entrepreneur, you should choose VCs who are trying to help you, who are working hard to help you. I think the reason we end up with this very dismal result where venture capitalists in general end up hurting, not helping, is because most VCs don't know how to help. Most VCs don't understand that if somebody is learning how to ride a bicycle, screaming at them and saying, pedal faster or, don't fall down is not helpful to the person who's sitting on the bicycle. That is not how you teach someone how to ride a bicycle. When someone wants to learn how to ride a bicycle, the way to help them is to say, everybody falls down. It's okay. If you're not hurt, let's get up and try again. If you're really hurt, let's take a break. We'll come back tomorrow and we'll try again. That's how you help someone how to learn to ride a bicycle, because they're going to learn by themselves. What really happens in a bicycle, for those of people in your audience who are engineers, it's the centripetal force being balanced with the centrifugal force of the wheel, which is why you cannot fall down. Once you reach a certain speed, you will not fall down. You know that. I mean, a bicycle doesn't fall down, even though it's on these two very thin wheels, because once those wheels start turning, it's impossible for it to fall down. Exactly why a top keeps spinning, it becomes exactly focused. If you take a top and you spin it on the ground, it becomes perfectly smooth and it starts spinning. So it's physics. It's basic physics. Those laws of physics, dictate that once you reach that speed, you will guaranteed not fall down. But you have to experience that when you are sitting on the bicycle and know that you have to pedal and you have to do that. And it's an awkward vehicle, right? I mean, for other reasons, it's designed the way it is. Because of mechanical reasons, it's designed the way it is. But that pedal on a bicycle is incredibly asymmetric, right? It's a circle. And so the amount of force that you can put on that pedal changes continuously as it is moving. At the top and the bottom, you can't put any force on the pedal. You have from your right foot, you have to start putting force on the left foot, because right at the top, you can't push on it. It's the other foot which has to move the pedal. These types of things you only learn by getting it. It's very easy to do it once you're on there. And, I assume most people who are listening to this know how to ride a bicycle. So the way you teach someone to ride a bicycle is not to tell them things like that. Centripetal force, pedal on top, asymmetric forces. You don't need any of that stuff. Okay. What they need is encouragement. What they need is the right attitude. What they need is maybe help getting resilient, building up. When you fall down and you get a little hurt, you say, it's okay. It's just a scratch. Let's put a Band-Aid and let's keep going, right? That's what most parents do for their children when they fall off a bicycle. The mistake that VCs make more often than not, and I have sat in many board meetings and many investor meetings where I cringe when people do this. They'll start talking about, those forces and the pedals and the things. What I tell those VCs, if they happen to work for me as it used to be in the past or whatever, is that if you're having to tell the person that, you've got the wrong person. You made the mistake of picking the wrong entrepreneur. That's not what you should be telling them. Your job is to cheer them on, to help them, to support them. If they are making some big mistake, they don't understand some concept, then take them aside and then help them understand that. That's also our job. Our job is to help them see things that they are not seeing. But it is not to tell them what to do on a daily basis. That is not our job as a VC. I think most VCs don't understand that and make that mistake of giving day-to-day instructions, of trying to, in effect, run the company on behalf of the entrepreneur. And my answer to those VCs is, then you pick the wrong entrepreneur. The entrepreneur you need to pick is the one who's going to run the company by himself or herself. That's who you want.
When you were describing how most VCs don't know how to help, I had my hair on the neck of my neck standing up. And then when you started talking about teaching people how to ride a bicycle, I have tears in my eyes because I have 2 young kids and I know what it's like to be a parent, which I think I emailed you in advance. What do you think about education? You talk about education is from doom to womb. And I have a guess that it really has something to do with how your parents give you the education, give you the presence. And I wonder if there are stories that you still remember to this day that your parents have done with you together, early memories that really help you shape this philosophy to education.
Yeah, so education is very near and dear to my heart because I am entirely a product of education. In the earlier part of the story, I talked about the environment in which I grew up. My best friend, when I was a little child, we used to play in the mud and, just do that. My best friend, by definition, we are the same age. We were little babies and we grew up together and, did all of those things. He used to live in the same village as me, and he unfortunately did not get the gift of education. And he, even today, works as a laborer in the field, literally with a shovel every day, digging mud, just doing what a farmer does in a village in rural India. And we have completely different lives only because I got the gift of education and he did not get the gift of education. So it is one of the greatest gifts. In my opinion, the 2 greatest gifts you can give anyone are good health and education. Those are the 2 greatest gifts you can give someone. Because I don't know anything about health and I've been very lucky to be healthy myself, I focus on education. That's what I think really matters over there. I do have to correct the quote, though, that you mentioned, and that's partly because of my accent, growing up in India and coming here. The exact quote was from my 2nd grade teacher, Mrs. George, who said, education is a process from womb meaning, when you are inside your mother's body, to tomb meaning when you are dead and buried. So education is a process from womb to tomb. In other words, you are constantly being educated. It's only your choice whether you choose to accept that education, whether you choose to learn from that or not. So, that's really what I believe about education. It is a continuous process and it is a lifetime process. And if you keep educating yourself, you'll keep growing. It is well accepted. There's a lot of good academic research that you reduce the risk of Alzheimer's as you grow older if you keep yourself educated. If you keep learning new skills and keep studying, you actually reduce the risk of that. So exercise and education are the two things that have much greater impact than any medicine that we have been able to find so far. The second thing which I will say about education is a quote. I believe this is Mark Twain. I'm not 100% sure whose quote it is, but the quote about is, "I've never met a man who was so ignorant that I could not learn something from him." I believe it's Mark Twain. I believe in that. In other words, I believe everybody has something they can teach me. Everybody knows something better than I do. My job is to figure out what is it that they know better than me and learn that. So for example, on this podcast, it's very clear to me that you are a wonderful interviewer. You are a wonderful interlocutor. That's not a skill that I practice. Okay. You have a focus on life, on living, on growth, the philosophy, which are areas that I happen not to focus on. I mean, I have an opinion about them because I've lived my life and I'm older than you, and I have some thoughts and I'm sharing them over here. Hopefully people are finding them useful. But that's not what I'm an expert in. You, on the other hand, I believe, understand it very well, which is part of what makes you such a good interviewer. And I can see that Roxy here agreed with us with a good thumbs up. Everybody who agrees with me on the way Faye is asking these wonderful questions, please raise your hand or clap or something, let her know, because I'm enjoying this conversation in an area that I know nothing about, right? In an area that I don't focus on. If you want to talk to me about, convolutional neural networks, if you want to talk to me about what's happening with LLMs, large language models in AI, or, on the systems level, with the end of Moore's law, what's going to be the impact, in terms of chip design, or where we are going with Kubernetes, those are topics that I love to talk about. That's the area that I spend my life in. So it's a very different part of focus. And again, I thank you for asking these questions and leading the conversation in this very, I think, productive way.
No wonder people say you are a co-founding investor. Without me asking, you're saying nice things about me, which makes me happy and encourages me to do more what I'm doing. So thank you, Ashmeet. I think we're running out of time. I want to ask one final question, and then I'll open it up to the floor for the audience to ask questions, which is, how do you measure the success of your own life?
Oh, that is a very deep question. And it really goes to the heart of something that I think most people don't think enough about, which is, what do you want to do? What is your goal? Why are you doing what you're doing? Is it even going to make you happy if you get to where you are going? Most people have not answered that question adequately before, they start working on things. So let me first start by saying what I believe is not a good measure of happiness or success in your life. I think the most important thing to understand is that money is not a good measure of happiness or success. There's lots of studies on this, that, once you have enough money to have, a good health, good food, basic needs are met. If you're so poor that you don't have food or you don't have clothes or a house, then that's different. But once you get enough to get above that basic minimum level, then money doesn't add to happiness. There are very rich people who are unhappy, and there are people who don't have a lot of money who are very happy. So we know, good academic research, that money is not what is going to make you happy. I learned this from my mother. My mother always said to me that there will always be someone who has more money than you, and there will always be someone who has less money than you. If you are feeling demotivated, if you are feeling tired, if you are feeling, not like, if you feel like not working hard, look to the person who has more money than you, and it will get you excited, and you will feel jealous, and you will feel ambitious, and you will feel that again. On the other side, if you feel that, you have succeeded, and you are being rude, or you have an ego, or you are unhappy with life, look to the person who has less money than you, and you will feel content. You will feel satisfied. You will feel grateful that you have more in life than they have. And so there's always somebody who's ahead of you and always somebody who's behind you. She used the word with money because money is such an easy thing to talk about. I actually think this applies to everything. There's someone who will be more taller than you, who's shorter than you, somebody who's more beautiful than you, more handsome than you, less handsome than you, somebody who has more friends than you, less friends than you, etc. In other words, you can apply it to all of these things. To any attribute, you can apply it to them. So let's understand that happiness doesn't come from that. I'll end by saying that I believe happiness comes from alignment. It comes when your thoughts, your actions, your deeds are aligned with each other, and they are consistent with each other. Then you can be happy, and you can, and then I believe you would have succeeded in life in doing that. So that's really where true happiness comes from. I think it was Gandhi or someone who said something like that. I don't know who said it, but in any case, I do believe that. And that's how I try to live my life. It doesn't mean I'm perfect. I mean, there are days when I'm depressed or angry or, upset or, whatever, then you have to remind yourself, I go for a walk. I have a dog. She likes to go for a walk with me, and then I like to talk to her, and she's a very good listener. She listens to whatever I say, and very nicely, and wags her tail. And so then I feel happy.
Thank you, Ashmeet. I think the alignment between one's thoughts, words, and action is the only criteria I have for inviting my speakers. So we are aligned in that. Let me open up to questions from the floor. Anyone want to ask a question? You can unmute yourself or put in the chat, whatever you prefer. Thank you, Ashmeet, and thank you so much for your wisdom and stories today, and for your time, and especially, a lot of our audience who are to-be founders. I think hearing from you very encouraging messaging is super, super helpful. I also give you the last words of wisdom to our audience. If people who are thinking about entrepreneurship but too scared to do it, what would you say to them? What will be our last words of wisdom?
Oh, I love ending on that question. And I hope this doesn't come across as too pessimistic, but I like to say entrepreneurship is it is such a difficult journey that you should really only do it if you absolutely want to do it. And the test for whether you're ready to be an entrepreneur or not is if there is literally nothing else that you want to do. If you have a job that you are thinking between, like, should I work for Google or should I start a company? Or if you're thinking, whether you should, whether there's some other way in which you could do it, you could go to school, etc. Whatever the alternative is, it's probably a better thing for you to do. It is only when you have no choices left that you should say, I have to be an entrepreneur. It should be the very last item on your list. And if it is, then best of luck. It's a tough journey, but it is also the greatest journey and one of the most rewarding journeys that you can have in your life. Best of luck.
Thank you, Ashmeet. That was the exact line in my diary 5 years ago. There's nothing else I want to do besides being an entrepreneur. So thank you so much again. And please, the video will be uploaded on Loving Life YouTube channel if you want to watch it, rewatch again. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a good day.
Thank you, Faye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.